Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Katherine Freeley, Global Head of Media and Digital Procurement at Novartis. Katherine, what a pleasure to see you. Welcome to the show. Delighted to be talking to you.
Thank you, Deborah. I am delighted to be invited to the show. So I'm very excited about this and thank you for having me.
A pleasure. A pleasure. Well, look, why don't we jump right in? Because you and I have known each other for a while. And I know that you've worked for major agencies as well as large multinational marketers from Colgate Palmolive to now Novartis. And one of the things that I've always found remarkable about you is that you've always been a driver of digital transformation in both global marketing and media. So, with that background, just tell us, is there one industry topic right now that you believe is of critical importance?
Thank you, Deborah. So yeah, you've known me for a while, and I think that there's so many different topics right now: data ownership, privacy, driving digital that matters. But I would like to take this opportunity and maybe focus on one topic that's really close to my heart, which I think is, the relationship between media, marketing procurement, and agencies. So, as you know, ANA has run a survey on how marketing procurement is perceived. And I had a pleasure to actually participate in this 12 years ago when they actually ran the first survey. And now I participated in the survey again. And when the results were revealed, we have noticed that the perception of marketing procurement has not improved that tremendously, which was, I think, a little bit of a surprise to people that are like, close to this industry. So marketers accept marketing procurement, at least look at 50%. But agencies are like not even, they're in denial almost that we exist. And the gap between agencies and market procurement is so wide. So, for me, this is something that I think we as an industry, ANA, 4As, we should really tackle. How can we get closer together? Because I think at this moment, marketing procurement is here to stay. Agencies are obviously here to stay. And how can we close that gap? How can we collaboratively come to, to close that perception gap? I think would be something that I would now be very passionate about, and I would be very interested in pursuing this topic further.
It's interesting that you say that because I do know something about you, and I think that one of the things that you've been able to do in your role is to be a true diplomat in your procurement roles. And sometimes what that often means is enabling others to believe that they've made a solution when it might have actually been initiated through procurement or through an individual who truly cares.
Yes.
And I'm surprised, as you are, that those results weren't better because it does seem that there have been a lot of strides that
Yes.
have been made.
Mhm.
Why do you think the perceptions in a dozen years haven't changed? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that there is a lot of reasons. And, I think what has helped me tremendously to maybe be successful in this field is that I have started on the agency side and I spent 13 years, buying and planning media and talking to the clients, right? So when I came onto the procurement side or to develop the procurement department, actually, which it didn't really exist for media at Colgate, I was able to bring my agency hat and I was able to have that client service sort of mindset. And I think that's what made me very successful. And so much so that then I went onto the global marketing side to run global marketing and media operations, which then I switched sides again and I was on the client side. So I think what helped me was to be on all the sides of this industry. And I always collaborated and worked with the agencies so closely. But as you said, procurement is not a party that has, a final say. It's not a party that makes decisions. It's not a party that has a budget. Therefore, the right procurement individual needs to be, as you mentioned, a diplomat. But what the procurement people do have is an ability to influence. And I think that if we're able to properly influence, it's an amazing power because we actually go into different sides of the organizations. We go to chief procurement officers, we go to chief financial officers, we go to chief marketing officers, and we influence every single function from a different angle. So I think that the ability to actually align on the top and an ability to influence. And oh, and I don't want to even forget the agencies of the party. I mean, we go to the CEOs of the agencies, heads of holding groups. I mean, we negotiate with them. So we really do go to every part of the organization and we're able to present ideas and seed them and then see how the seeds turn into trees of decisions. And truthfully, that is the power that procurement has. And another topic I think that I would like to maybe just bring up to your attention, everybody else's attention, is that procurement very often in large multinational companies sits in between all the business units, and the ability of actually unite the business units in huge multinational corporations cannot be undermined and underplayed because usually those big business units work and operate in separate businesses. And if procurement is able to actually bring those interests together, then this, window of opportunity is open where we can negotiate on behalf of really large organizations with other large organizations like big media platforms, large holding groups, you name it. But that is the power of procurement that I think is here to stay if it's properly introduced and cultivated within organizations.
No, that it's interesting that you say that because I know one of the things that one of your strong points is really turning conceptual goals into tactical executions. And I think that that's often a downfall when you get so many multiple stakeholders trying to do what's best and each having a different role to play.
Yeah.
But I also think you've said something very interesting in the past. And as you do a lot of this negotiation, you've often noticed that sometimes things are more punitive than rewarding when
Yes.
it comes to some of these agreements.
Yes.
I'm be curious if you would mind talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I can obviously talk a little bit about this concept. I have always been a proponent of rewarding and not penalizing. I think that people, agencies, marketing companies work much better as partners. And I think in true partnerships, you know, the penalty or maluses as they're called in the industry are very demotivating. We are here, we work together very hard. Agencies are known for long hours, and marketing side is also very time consuming and intensive. And I think that the schemes that are able to actually reward companies, agencies, higher than penalize them are much more motivating for the parties to come together and work towards one goal. But I would like to highlight, which we don't really see it in the industry often, is actually alignment of goals. Very often, the goals of marketing and procurement are not aligned. Very often, the goals of marketing, procurement, and agencies are not aligned. And I think that I would want to bring this up on the industry, stages is how do we align the goals? Because if we would look towards the one direction, this is actually, I think, something that can be the beginning of success of how all the parties perceive each other. Because then you sort of are one team, kicking to the same goal or trying to gain scores together versus sort of working against all different KPIs, goals, and sort of like not be collaborative throughout the process.
It's interesting that you say that because when you think about alignment of goals, and maybe you can address each of these, but you think about the human relationship
Yeah.
aspect. You think about brand success because obviously that's what everyone's here for. Maybe how you define brand success might be a specific KPI. And you're also dealing with a world that's changed post-COVID in terms of the way we work and in terms of, I would say, greater concerns about employee needs. So, how does that all play? And I know there's a lot there, but why don't we start with the human aspect of this? Um,
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's a complicated and complex question, and we can unpack it. And I think the human aspect is so close to my heart because the relationships that we make are human relationships. And with the rise of technology, and you mentioned COVID, which I think also enabled and made technology so powerful for our human connections, is that human element that has been a little bit lost. And I think, now I am so happy that we're actually reconnecting as humans, that we're having more in person meetings, that we are able to actually align on the KPIs that matter. Because I think it's that, seeing what is the beauty in the eye of the beholder, right? What is success look like for this brand versus the other brand, this company versus another company. And I think that this is the recipe for success. If you are able to come as humans and outline what is success look like to you, this is the beginning of alignment for the goals and KPIs that would drive success to the brands, that would translate into business results that would ultimately drive growth. And what I have seen, Deborah, in the industry in the past 3 years, everybody is obsessed with driving the growth. How do we drive growth? How do we, how are we prepared for what everybody is saying, maybe difficult, recession ahead of us? How do we do that successfully? And I think how we do it successfully is we actually sit down together and we outline the goals. And I think that it really should start from the client side, whether it's marketing, business, procurement, finance, should sit down together and outline what success looks like for me for the next year. And then once we know what success looks like for us, we should sit down with the agency and clearly outline those KPIs, and then allow the agency to actually provide some opinions and points of view of what they can truly impact or drive. And we should then align of what those KPIs for driving success for the brands, ultimately driving the growth for the business look like. And I think that if we can come up with that scheme together, that we have that common goal that we look towards, and that we will be moving much more effectively and efficiently towards achieving the goals. Another thing that I would like to bring up, when you or when I try to influence setting up of the KPIs, I always try to look into qualitative and quantitative. And I know that the industry right now is so obsessed with data and numbers, but I still really cherish the qualitative KPIs because this section or this part of the KPIs actually allows you to cultivate a dialogue for continuous improvement. And I think it is so important to allow for this dialogue to happen in between marketing and agencies. And procurement in this equation really just, kind of plays a stewardship role. We're only a party that kind of makes this process, easy and effective. But being there during a lot of those discussions, I have to say that that's where the beginning of great human relationships start. And it turns the dialogue from the punitive to more of building that continuous improvement spirit. And I think that that's really important.
Well, you've made it all sound so simple. You've really I told us. I mean, it's amazing that in just a matter of minutes you've been able to captivate the human essence of client agency relationships, for lack of a better term, as well as the um, the side that moves toward growth. And I think what you're also saying is that the KPIs don't necessarily have to be that complicated. Maybe they can be few in number and very clear, as opposed to a lot of other indicators that might be measuring whether agency performance is doing well or not. Is that right?
I think that you completely got the essence of this. I think where the industry has gone right now is complexity. The complexity is everywhere. And the KPIs that we have fine tuned over the years became so difficult that and so complex, and there's so many of them that truthfully sometimes the agency doesn't even know what to focus on. And so, I don't remember which famous person said, if I had more time, I would have, written a shorter letter. But I am completely, a proponent of, hey, let's spend more time thinking about what matters. Let's align out what really I want my agency to drive. And let's focus on maybe two or three KPIs that really matter. Not 15, not 20, and then you try to have a different matrix and a different report and a different um, mechanism of measurement, and at the end of the day you're like, but what was really what mattered, what did I really want my agency to drive, right? So I am totally with you. I think that the industry should now try from this chaos and complexity and multiple indicators and dashboards for the KPIs, try to really sit down and say, what do I really want from my agency and prioritize? And I love the formula of maybe three things, like three must do's or start do's and three stop do's. And I think that if we can just get to such a simple scheme, it would be very productive for all the parties involved.
Yeah, and sometimes simplicity enables real creativity to occur.
Yep.
If you have too many boundaries and sometimes even the work suffers, never mind the relationship suffering, but sometimes the work suffers, and the whole goal is to build, better business outcomes. So I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Let me ask you something else that seems to be trending quite a bit today, and that's the whole role of in-house agencies. And I'd wonder if you have some advice, because I think a lot of people decide that they're going to set them up because they might have some talent on hand who's quite knowledgeable, and that it might seem initially like greater control with data and more cost savings and so on. But sometimes that may not be the right decision. And then we go back, speaking of KPIs, to then how do you evaluate your in-house agency? Do you do it differently from the way you evaluate your external agencies? And again, typically a very packed question, but I know you can handle it.
Oh, Deborah, they're just getting more complex, the questions, but I'll try to unpack this as well. I have been a huge proponent of in housing for a while. However, I think that this is not one size fits all equation. I think that before you start in housing, you really need to look at your organizational structures of your company and ask yourself a question: is my organization ready for in housing? Is my organization built for in housing? And then, is my organization will my organization align on in-housing, right? So if you answer all those questions, yes, 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 perhaps then your organization is a really good candidate for in-housing, initiatives. Also with in-housing, I think that it's always better to sort of like have a smaller initiative and then start growing or scaling up versus sell some kind of a top executive on that idea, have a huge enterprise, and then, see that after a while, maybe it's not producing the same results as they were expected, and then having to scale down. Because at this stage, what you're dealing with, you're trying to, eliminate your internal resources, your internal employees versus assessing and evaluating third party companies and trying to either scale up or scale down. So, going back to, if you answer all the questions, yes, my organization is perfect for in housing. I have this pilot, it works well. I'm scaling it up. It's fantastic. Then how do you evaluate the in-house versus the outside agencies? Um, well, I think that the best recipe for success is to have the same set of KPIs. At the end of the day, you cannot evaluate your internal unit differently than you evaluate an agency, because then you're being biased. You don't have the same criteria. And truthfully, the outside agency that maybe has been your partner for sometimes 15, 30 years, I've known relationships, that are really long, is sort of being penalized because the measuring stick is completely different. So I think that if you're able to actually bring the common denominator to your in-house agency and your outside agency that has been your partner or is your partner, and demonstrate the same return on investment, then you have a better way of measuring the effectiveness of the in-housing versus outside agency. That is my observation from my in-housing journey that I have been on. And when it's done, it can be very, very successful for the business. But when it's not done right, it can also be very detrimental to the business. And I think another sort of like advice from my experience is that if it's not done right, then you are actually um, having not a great relationship with your internal stakeholders, and not with the external ones, which is always more difficult. I always say that I spend much more time negotiating internally, and this is a much more difficult negotiation than when I negotiate externally.
Very interesting. Probably the external agencies are more familiar with having to go through that negotiation process. And sometimes it's tricky internally because people are employees and might see their role somewhat differently. But I think again, if there's one word that comes through so much in what you've been talking about, it's really alignment, alignment, alignment of goals and the fairness that comes out of the alignment of goals and the ability to enable people to do to do their jobs well when they do have that minimal framework. Let's just talk for 1 second about something we've hinted at, but we really haven't discussed. And that's data. Now, I know we talked about qualitative and quantitative evaluations and so on, but I know that you're passionate about using data to drive marketing decisions. Could you tell us just what that means for you? Because you opened up by saying, data is one of those hot issues.
Yes, absolutely. So I don't attend one meeting or conversation when data doesn't come up, right? So data is very powerful. We're all obsessed about data. But what does data mean for me? I have a very intimate relationship with data because I am married to a data scientist, actually. And we cannot be two different people. He looks at data from a computer standpoint of view, from programming, coding. He knows how to talk to computers. I know how to talk to humans. So I take the data points that those data scientists, develop and spend a lot of times really obsessing over quality of data, taxonomy, the right code, what comes out. And I kind of zoned in at the data that matters for decision making. Because having worked for a pharma company right now, which is very data rich, I also have noticed that you could get what I call a data confusion. There's so much data coming from different sources, and sometimes the data doesn't corroborate. It's actually quite, different. And so now you as a decision maker, how do you then take all this data or some of the data and really empower your decision making? And that can be for agency evaluations, it can be for aligning goals, it can be for driving growth, it can be for establishing the matrix for brand health and success. So I am a big proponent about actually sort of working backwards, looking at a report or an outcome of all the data sources that come in and say, what are the five, topics that I want to drive, and I want my data to support those five areas of decision making. And I almost want to work backwards, saying, this is what matters to me. Maybe return on investment on media, improvement of my script lift or sales, market share improvement, whatever that is for you as a company, and then work backwards on those 5 or 6 data streams that will empower or update or enable my decision making for those 5 important KPIs that I have outlined for myself, for my department, or for my agency. And I think that that's how I want to look at the data, because at this moment we live with the data overload and a real, like, sometimes confusion. Which data source should we be using to actually validate our decisions?
No, it's a big topic, but like so many topics that are complicated, you seem to be able to find some clarity in working through it. So it's just wonderful to listen to you and perhaps to even listen with new ears, so to speak, if that's possible. Well, our time is drawing to a close, but it wouldn't be a proper interview if I didn't ask you a very big question at the end. And that's, what do you see ahead for the industry? And I would say from both a positive and a negative perspective.
Oh, Deborah, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. However, I think that I always look at a positive and negative as, like, two ends sort of the same um, spectrum, right? So what I see as as negative, maybe let's start from negative, is complexity, chaos, information overload, the rise of artificial intelligence. But as much as it is maybe negative because we haven't worked with this or we're not so familiar with it, so whatever we're not really familiar with always makes us anxious and a little bit, unsettled. I think is also a positive thing because this can be turned as like those are your areas of opportunities. And if you look at them from the positive angle, and you are able to sort of be more agile and pivot and not be set in your old ways, but always look at all those trends with like a learning mindset and being open to change. I think that that's an opportunity. So I am trying to live my sort of professional life as being very open to change and pivot and trying to always look at the positive side and say, hey, how can I be more agile? How can I use the what I thought was the negative to a positive and attack those sort of new opportunities that way.
Well, you are an amazingly balanced person, but I also have to say that the industry should be grateful that you have the passion that you do, to really want to make a difference, to make relationships, critical relationships better, and to think through basic goals and basic KPIs. And I think you're right to be making a lot of noise about that, because it seems, at least from this conversation, that these things could be pretty easily solvable, with that wonderful word alignment. So I hope that you will join us again and let us know if and hopefully it won't be in 12 years, but you'll let us know if you're seeing some viable change. And we'd love to hear more of your views. It's really been a pleasure listening to you.
Well, thank you, Deborah. Thank you for inviting me. And I would be delighted to come back and hopefully update you on a great progress that the industries have made with I'll put my passion into it and open mindset, and hopefully we can have some good updates coming our way quite, in a shorter time frame than 12 years.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Deborah.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal